Cowboys thundered across the prairie, kicking clouds of dust high into the air. The Lakota village stood in their path, innocent and unaware, firelight flickering softly within the teepees as families settled into evening meals. Inside one teepee, Wachui gently combed her daughter Camimila's long raven hair. At 8, Camimila embodied the meaning of her name, Little Butterfly, with a brightness that warmed her mother's heart each time she smiled. "Mother," Camimila asked softly, looking toward the tent's opening, "do you hear thunder?" Wachui listened carefully, her smile fading. It wasn't thunder, nor was it friendly. It was the drumming of hooves against earth, sharp and growing louder with terrifying speed. Her breath caught in her throat. "Stay here," she whispered urgently, heart hammering. She pulled aside the hide flap and stared into the darkness. Men on horseback were charging, shouting, their faces twisted with hatred. Rifles glistened coldly beneath the scarlet sky. Wachui turned, eyes wide and panicked, and rushed back inside, grabbing Camimila's small hand. "We must go." The screams had begun, wild and full of anguish. Gunshots cracked through the night, scattering the villagers like frightened deer. Smoke rose from freshly lit torches, casting eerie shapes into the darkness. Wachui lifted her daughter into her arms, feeling Camimila trembling against her chest. Her pulse pounded painfully in her temples as she ran from their teepee, her only thought to escape the violent shadows closing in. A man's voice roared behind her, drunkenly triumphant. "Round them all up! Burn it down!" She sprinted through chaos, eyes blurred by smoke and tears. Teepees ignited rapidly, orange tongues licking the night sky. Bodies lay strewn across the grass, faces of neighbors and friends frozen forever in shock and grief. She could hear footsteps behind her, heavy and relentless. "Stop there, woman!" a harsh voice commanded. Wachui ran harder, stumbling but refusing to fall. Camimila clung desperately, eyes wide with terror, tiny fingers gripping her mother's shoulders. "Mother," she whimpered weakly, "please don't let them catch us." The river loomed ahead, her only hope. Just as safety felt possible, a cowboy appeared, his horse blocking their path. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, eyes gleaming coldly in firelight. "Where you running to, pretty lady?" he sneered, sliding off his mount, rifle aimed at her heart. Wachui froze, breath shaking violently, eyes flickering toward the rushing water behind him. Despair churned inside her, replaced instantly by raw maternal courage. She held her daughter tighter. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible above the distant cries of the dying. "Let us pass." The cowboy laughed cruelly, taking a slow step forward, relishing the fear in her eyes. "Ain't nowhere to go, savage." Wachui's jaw tightened, anger igniting her soul. She'd die before letting harm touch Camimila. Before the man could take another step, she grabbed a heavy stone near her feet, swinging with desperate strength. The blow cracked loudly against his jaw, dropping him instantly. She didn't pause to see if he rose. Breath coming in ragged gasps, she darted toward the riverbank, heart wild and pounding. Behind her, shouts grew louder, angrier, bullets whistling dangerously close. Reaching the river's edge, Wachui hesitated briefly, eyes scanning the rapid currents that shimmered beneath pale moonlight. She turned, seeing torches closing in behind her. Her heart hammered violently, forcing a decision. "We have no choice," she murmured, pressing a fierce kiss to Camimila's forehead. "Hold tightly." Together, they plunged into the frigid waters. Cold engulfed them instantly, stealing their breath. The current pulled violently, dragging them beneath, fighting to separate mother and daughter. Fear surged through Wachui, limbs thrashing against the merciless river. She felt Camimila slipping away, fingertips scraping desperately to hold on tiny wrists. "No!" she screamed into the night, water choking her voice. Summoning strength she didn't know existed, she grasped Camimila's hand tighter, pulling her small, gasping body closer against her chest. The current tossed them downstream, spinning and bruising against hidden rocks beneath the surface, leaving pain exploding through her bones. Minutes stretched agonizingly, until at last their bodies collided heavily with the opposite shore. Gasping, Wachui dragged herself and Camimala from the icy water, coughing violently, exhausted limbs trembling uncontrollably. Collapsed on muddy ground, she clutched her daughter fiercely, tears mingling with water droplets running down her cheeks. Camimala trembled in her embrace, wet hair plastered across her innocent face, eyes hollowed by shock and sorrow. "I won't let anything happen to you," Wachui whispered fiercely, stroking her daughter's shivering back. "I promise." Exhausted but fueled by desperation, Wachui rose unsteadily, pulling Camimala gently upright. Behind them, flames consumed what remained of their home. She turned her back, feeling a hollow ache deep within her chest. All they knew was lost, yet survival demanded she move forward. With stars as their only guide, mother and daughter stumbled onward through a land now alien and unforgiving. Hours stretched painfully as prairie turned to forest, thick trees towering like silent sentinels. Fatigue blurred their vision, hunger gnawed, but Wachui refused to falter. Her daughter's life depended on her resilience. Finally, as dawn painted the eastern horizon, Camimala collapsed, small body shivering uncontrollably. Wachui knelt beside her, eyes filling with tears of fear and frustration. "We must rest now," she whispered soothingly, voice hoarse with exhaustion, though her own fear screamed inside her mind. Suddenly, her heartbeat stilled. A soft rustling emerged from the shadows, footsteps cautious yet steady. Her breath stopped, muscles coiling tightly with defensive readiness. Slowly, a figure emerged into the muted dawn glow, tall, lean, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his features. Silver badge glinting gently in morning light. The rifle cocked, echoing sharply through the quiet forest. "Easy now," the man's voice drawled gently but firmly. "You look mighty lost." Wachui's eyes widened, pulse quickening. Instinctively, she shielded her daughter. "Who are you?" He stepped closer, slowly lowering the weapon, revealing rugged, kind eyes that had seen too much of violence, yet held compassion. "Name's Elijah Hartwell, ma'am. Most folks call me Eli. Sheriff out of these parts." Wachui felt sudden weakness flood her limbs, yet held her ground. "Why would you help us?" His gaze softened, glancing at Camimala. "Because no child should suffer this." Something shifted within her. Hope whispered tentatively through her exhausted heart. She nodded slowly, feeling fragile trust bloom beneath suspicion. "I can't promise safety," Eli murmured thoughtfully, "but I won't leave you behind." Beneath the pale dawn, Wachui nodded, meeting his steady gaze. Fate had given them a chance. She would grasp it. "Then we go with you," she whispered, strength returning softly to her voice. Eli smiled faintly, respect deepening his eyes. "Then come. Your journey's far from over." And beneath a sky that promised nothing but uncertainty, they stepped forward, united by survival and hope, into a future none could predict. The forest thickened swiftly as Sheriff Eli Hartwell led Wachui and her young daughter, Camimala, deeper into unfamiliar territory. Branches tangled overhead, blotting out the warmth of morning sunlight, plunging their surroundings into perpetual twilight. Shadows shifted restlessly beneath towering pines, whispering secrets as old as the wilderness itself. Wachui's heart beat an uneasy rhythm, her distrustful eyes lingering often on Eli's broad back. Her fingers stayed protectively wrapped around Camimala's small hand, prepared to fight or flee at the slightest sign of betrayal. Her instincts screamed caution, even as gratitude flickered quietly within her weary soul. "Where are you taking us?" she finally asked, voice guarded yet betraying the exhaustion gnawing at her strength. Eli glanced back briefly, his gaze steady yet unreadable beneath the brim of his weather-beaten hat. "A cabin deeper in these woods," he answered calmly, "hidden enough to be safe, at least for now." His words did little to reassure Wachui. Trusting this man, a white man bearing a badge no less, seemed foolish. Yet her options had vanished with her burning village. Kimimala stumbled slightly, exhaustion catching her steps, and Wachui paused to lift the trembling child into her aching arms. Eli slowed, noticing their fatigue. "We can rest a while, if you need." Wachui hesitated, pride warring briefly with practicality. Her legs shook beneath her daughter's slight weight. Silently, she lowered herself onto a moss-covered log. Eli settled nearby, gaze thoughtful but distant, rifle resting comfortably on his knees. Kimimala's dark eyes studied him closely from beneath heavy lids. "Are you a good man, Sheriff Eli?" she asked softly, directness pure in her innocence. He smiled faintly, warmth softening his usually stern features. "Not always, I reckon," he admitted, eyes flickering briefly toward Wachui's guarded stare. "But I try." Wachui felt her defenses soften ever so slightly at his honesty. He wasn't what she expected, neither cruel nor indifferent. Yet trust came slowly. Too many wounds were fresh upon her heart. She remained quiet, contemplating the stranger who chose mercy over convenience. After brief rest, Eli guided them onward. Hunger gnawed sharply at Wachui's stomach, her steps heavy with exhaustion. Eli noticed, pausing beside a small stream. "We'll stop here," he said gently. "Water, rest, perhaps some food." She watched silently as he crouched beside the water, setting a makeshift fishing line from supplies tucked carefully in his coat pocket. His movements were confident, purposeful, revealing years of survival shaped by hardship. Kimimala settled quietly beside her mother, fingers tracing patterns softly through the dirt. "You have family?" Wachui finally asked, breaking silence hesitantly, curiosity outweighing caution. Eli's expression shifted subtly, pain briefly flickering across rugged features. He admitted quietly. "Lost my wife and daughter years back. Fever took him both." Wachui lowered her gaze respectfully, understanding the quiet ache behind his calm facade. "You suffer like us," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Pain ain't particular about who it visits," Eli murmured gently, meeting her eyes again. "But survival, finding reasons to keep moving, makes us stronger." The honesty in his words reached somewhere deep within her, sparking quiet admiration for this man who seemed hardened yet held compassion close. Kimimala stirred softly, her child's eyes heavy with sleep. Carefully, Wachui adjusted her daughter's head onto her lap, softly stroking dark hair. The afternoon deepened, sun sliding slowly toward the horizon, painting shadows darker. Eli managed to catch 2 small trout, skillfully cooking them over a modest fire. The scent made Wachui's stomach tighten painfully, gratitude mingling with lingering caution. While eating silently, Eli's sharp gaze suddenly snapped toward the trees, body instantly tense. He rose slowly, rifle appearing instinctively in his hands. "Quiet," he breathed sharply, voice edged with sudden urgency. Wachui stiffened, gripping Kimimala protectively, heart racing wildly. "What is it?" she asked, fear edging her tone. Eli listened intently, eyes narrowing as he studied the shadows. "Cougar," he whispered tersely, jaw tightening. "Been tracking us a while." Fear coiled tightly in Wachui's chest, breath catching painfully. She watched Eli's steady, determined movements as he carefully loaded his rifle, scanning the surrounding darkness. The quiet grew oppressive, each crackling twig sending her pulse racing faster. Suddenly, a guttural growl erupted from shadows behind them. Wachui turned sharply, panic flaring. Golden eyes glittered maliciously, predatory and hungry, the animal slinking toward them on silent, padded feet. "Stay behind me," Eli ordered sharply, voice calm but strained. The cougar lunged swiftly, muscles rippling beneath sleek fur, claws flashing dangerously in dying sunlight. Eli fired. A deafening explosion echoed through trees, but missed, bullet grazing fur harmlessly. The beast lunged again, closer now, teeth bared. Instinct surged through Wachui like lightning. Survival ignited strength she didn't know she possessed. Grabbing a burning branch from the fire, she swung fiercely toward the snarling predator. Flames illuminated desperate eyes, adrenaline drowning fear, pushing her forward. "Get back!" she shouted defiantly, voice stronger than ever before. Heart hammering, Watchawee stood her ground, the blazing branch forcing the cougar's retreating growl. Eli fired again, this time true, ending the deadly threat. Breathing hard, Eli stared at her with newfound respect, something deeper flickering quietly in his eyes. "You're stronger than you let on," he said softly, admiration unmistakable in his voice. Watchawee lowered her makeshift torch, heart slowly steadying from the rush of danger. She met his gaze, understanding blooming between them. Strength comes when it must. Darkness claimed the forest swiftly, forcing them onward to Eli's hidden cabin, a simple shelter blending seamlessly into wilderness. Inside, warmth and security chased shadows from the corners. Camilla fell quickly into deep, exhausted sleep near the fire. In quiet moments beside crackling flames, Watchawee and Eli sat silently, each weighed heavily by thoughts of loss, bravery, and the fragile thread linking their lives. "Why help us?" she finally asked, voice barely above whisper, searching his expression for truth hidden beneath quiet strength. He stared into the fire, thoughtful silence stretching gently. "Seen enough death and cruelty," he answered softly. "Maybe I'm just looking to save someone this time. Reckon I owe that much." Gratitude filled Watchawee's weary heart, mingling with cautious warmth. "You already have," she murmured gently. "You saved my daughter." His gaze softened deeply, meeting hers honestly beneath the firelight's soft glow. "But maybe she ain't the only one who needs Savon." Something shifted subtly within Watchawee's heart, a tender, hesitant bond forming beneath layers of fear and grief. Trust bloomed quietly, fragile yet growing stronger. As the night settled peacefully around them, shadows retreated before flickering flames. Eli's quiet strength enveloped Watchawee, offering comfort long absent from her world. It felt strangely right, despite the scars they carried. Outside, wilderness stretched endlessly, mysterious and threatening. Yet within this humble shelter, the possibility of hope quietly ignited. And beneath a moonlit sky, surrounded by shadows and whispered truths, Watchawee began to believe that perhaps their story wasn't destined only for suffering, but redemption. The days that followed slipped quietly into an uneasy rhythm, each one marked by survival, shared labor, and unspoken bonds forming subtly beneath the surface. Watchawee watched Eli carefully, still cautious, but her heart thawed slowly, softening under the sheriff's patient kindness and quiet strength. His gentleness with Camilla slowly eroded her doubts, like rain wearing softly against stone. For the first time in months, her daughter laughed, a sound so unexpected yet beautiful that it tightened Watchawee's chest with bittersweet joy. Eli moved through the wilderness with a hunter's grace, silent and deliberate, always aware of their surroundings. Yet beneath his quiet reserve lay an unexpected gentleness. One evening, as darkness spilled heavily across the forest, he patiently taught Camilla how to set a small rabbit snare, his deep voice warm with restrained humor as the girl tangled herself in the thin ropes. Watchawee watched from afar, a subtle smile playing on her lips, appreciating the surprising tenderness hidden beneath the sheriff's stoic exterior. But the wilderness tested them constantly. Food grew scarce, and a lingering tension shadowed Eli's brow. He understood that soon they'd have to venture beyond the relative safety of the cabin, risking encounters with outlaws, cowboys, or worse. And yet, he hesitated, glancing more often toward Watchawee, concern tightening his expression into something deeper, more personal than mere survival. Watchawee, too, struggled with conflicting emotions. Eli's kindness tugged gently at her heart, but memories of cruelty held tightly. She found herself studying him more closely, his quiet gestures, the kindness behind his rough exterior. One evening by the fire, curiosity finally overcame caution. Her voice emerged softly, hesitant yet determined. "Why help us, Eli? You could have walked away." Eli glanced up, firelight flickering across his lined face, shadows deepening his thoughtful expression. He took a slow breath, eyes distant with memory. "I've seen enough killing to fill 2 lifetimes," he said quietly. "Did enough of my own. Helping you felt like setting something right." "Redemption?" she asked quietly, testing the unfamiliar word on her tongue. He nodded slowly, eyes lost briefly in the flames. "Maybe so. Sometimes Savon, someone else, is the only way to save yourself." The silence that followed was comfortable, yet charged with unspoken understanding. Eli's quiet courage resonated deeply within Watchawee, breaking through her hardened grief, illuminating possibilities she'd never dared consider. She wondered if fate had guided their paths, 2 wounded souls drawn together amid tragedy. Days passed into restless nights, tension mingling with warmth and growing trust. But tranquility shattered suddenly one gray dawn, when the unmistakable scream of a cougar pierced the forest air, terrifyingly close. Eli sprang instantly awake, rifle already grasped tightly, muscles tense with readiness. Watchawee shielded Camilla instinctively, her heart racing fiercely, eyes scanning shadows outside. "It's found us," Eli growled softly, eyes fierce yet calm. He moved cautiously toward the cabin door, breathing steady, hand firm on the rifle's polished stock. "Stay inside." Watchawee hesitated, torn between fear and the need to protect her daughter. But her spirit, shaped by loss and resilience, rebelled against passivity. "No, I fight beside you." Eli paused, about to object, then recognized her determination. Respect flickered briefly in his eyes, understanding that she was not someone who would hide behind others. He nodded once sharply, accepting her choice. Outside, dawn painted the forest in ghostly silver. Eli stepped forward, rifle ready, eyes narrowed and tracking carefully. Watchawee followed, silently, gripping a sturdy knife tightly in trembling fingers. Suddenly, a low snarl rumbled through the underbrush. Time slowed, senses sharpened. From the shadows, golden eyes emerged first, glowing fiercely with animal hunger. In a blur of movement, the cougar lunged, powerful body a lethal blur. Eli's shot cracked sharply, echoing across trees, but the animal was quicker. The bullet grazed its shoulder, infuriating rather than stopping the beast. Watchawee's breath caught painfully as claws flashed dangerously close, ripping Eli's arm open in a spray of crimson. She didn't hesitate. Her blade flashed swiftly through air, sinking deeply into muscle and fur. The cougar shrieked, recoiling in shock and pain, momentarily retreating. Eli staggered backward, clutching his bleeding arm, face contorted yet fiercely determined. Without pause, he raised his rifle again, aiming carefully through blinding pain, and squeezed the trigger firmly. This shot was true, piercing the animal's heart and silencing its threat forever. As the cougar collapsed lifelessly, silence reclaimed the forest. Eli fell to his knees, breathing hard, blood soaking his sleeve. Watchawee knelt beside him, heart racing, torn fabric pressed quickly to his wound. She met his eyes fiercely, gratitude mingling with deep concern. "You risked yourself for us," she murmured gently, voice trembling slightly with emotion. Eli managed a shaky smile, humor faintly touching his pained expression. "Don't suppose I had much choice," he chuckled weakly, wincing slightly. "Figure you would have chased it off yourself if I didn't." Watchawee shook her head, faint laughter breaking through fear's lingering shadow. "I might have." He smiled warmly, despite pain, respect glowing brighter within his steady gaze. Camilla emerged timidly from the cabin, eyes wide with worry, yet quickly relieved seeing them alive. She knelt beside Eli, small hands gently touching his shoulder. "Are you badly hurt?" "Not too bad," Eli answered reassuringly, gently squeezing her tiny hand. "I've seen worse." Watchawee tended Eli's wounds carefully, hands gentle yet sure. Their closeness felt natural now, barriers lowering through shared peril. As evening approached, Eli rested comfortably beside a new fire, grateful eyes following Wachui's every careful movement. She glanced toward him, heart warm with newfound affection. "You saved me," she whispered softly. "I owe you much." Eli shook his head slowly, honesty shining deeply from his eyes. "We owe each other nothing. We're allies, partners, each helping the other survive." She smiled gently, comforted by that thought. Partners, allies, words unfamiliar yet hopeful. Trust, fragile yet growing steadily stronger, began quietly knitting their wounded hearts together. That night, beneath stars whispering softly of futures unknown, Camimila slept peacefully beside the fire, innocence reclaiming dreams long haunted by fear. Near her side, Eli and Wachui sat quietly, reflecting on battles won and fears conquered. Wachui felt strangely complete beside him, safe, understood, appreciated. Yet in Eli's quiet gaze lingered uncertainty, shadows he refused to voice aloud. He knew their fragile peace would not last. Danger was always nearby. His enemies, ruthless cowboys driven by greed and vengeance, hunted relentlessly. If they discovered him sheltering these fugitives, violence would swiftly follow. But tonight, Eli refused worry, embracing fleeting comfort shared with Wachui. Tomorrow's threats would come soon enough. Tonight belonged solely to peace, hope, and quiet moments exchanged between souls bound unexpectedly together. And as the fire burned slowly lower, Eli found himself silently vowing to protect Wachui and Camimila fiercely, whatever the cost. Nightfall cast long shadows over Eli's hidden cabin, deepening the silence between the sheriff and Wachui. Camimila slept quietly near the hearth, curled peacefully beneath woven blankets, oblivious to the rising tension of the adults nearby. Wachui watched Eli closely, sensing his unease, the restless way he gazed at the darkened forest beyond the window. "What troubles you, Eli?" she asked gently, her voice low enough to keep from waking her daughter. Her eyes sought his face, reading the subtle flicker of worry hidden behind his stoic demeanor. He hesitated, eyes narrowing into darkness as if seeing shadows unseen by others. "The cowboys haven't forgotten you," he murmured, jaw tight. "They won't leave us alone." Wachui's pulse quickened, and dread tightened her chest. She had hoped they'd outrun their past, but Eli's instinct was never wrong. Her hands clenched nervously. "Will they find us here?" His gaze met hers, serious and unwavering. "They already have." Her heart froze at his words, fear surging through her veins. "Ow!" He leaned closer, his voice steady despite the danger looming. "They tracked us. I saw signs yesterday. They'll strike tonight." Determination flickered within her eyes, courage burning fiercely beneath fear's shadow. "Then we fight." Eli nodded slowly, respect deepening in his weathered face. "Together, we stand a chance." They shared a quiet moment, eyes speaking promises neither had voiced aloud. Trust bound them now, trust forged in fire, tested by pain, and solidified by the quiet courage they saw reflected in each other. Hours passed quietly, tense with anticipation, preparations made swiftly and silently. Eli checked ammunition meticulously, rifle loaded, every bullet precious. Wachui sharpened her knife, feeling strength pulsing warmly beneath the dread that haunted her heart. Neither spoke much, understanding words couldn't ease the inevitable fight ahead. They moved gracefully, unified in purpose, each knowing what lay at stake. Night fell fully, bringing darkness that pressed in upon them, oppressive and suffocating. Eli stood by the window, vigilant, body coiled with readiness. Then, finally, beneath moonlight that cast eerie shadows, movement flickered within the tree lane. "They're here," Eli growled softly, voice edged with deadly calm. Wachui moved swiftly to wake Camimila, whispering reassurances even as her heart thundered painfully. "Hide beneath the floorboards," she urged gently, kissing her daughter quickly but tenderly. Do not emerge until I say it is safe. Camillala's eyes widened, fear trembling within them. But she obeyed without question, slipping silently into her hiding place beneath loose boards Eli had shown them earlier. Wachowski straightened, steeling herself against fear, knife trembling slightly in her grip. Gunshots erupted suddenly, splintering wood and shattering glass, bullets piercing walls around them. Eli fired back fiercely, his rifle roaring thunderously through the small cabin, striking true. Cries of pain echoed from outside, anger fueling shouts that promised ruthless violence. Suddenly, the cabin door burst open violently. Two cowboys stormed inside, rifles raised, faces twisted with hatred. Eli fired instantly, dropping one intruder to the floor with deadly accuracy. But another lunged, knocking Eli backward, sending his weapon skidding across the floorboards. Wachowski moved instantly, fiercely protective instinct surging like wildfire. She threw herself onto the man, blade flashing in desperate arcs. Pain seared through her shoulder as they grappled, his fists raining blows. Gritting her teeth through agony, she sank her blade deep, feeling his weight collapse, lifeless and heavy. A cry behind her tore through the air, Eli fighting hand-to-hand, struggling desperately against another attacker. Blood stained his face, eyes wild with determination as he wrestled fiercely. Panic surged within her as she watched helplessly, strength draining quickly from her injured shoulder. Just as the attacker raised a knife, Eli's fingers found a shard of shattered wood, thrusting upward fiercely. The intruder gasped, collapsing lifelessly to the cabin floor. Silence reclaimed the cabin briefly, punctuated only by their ragged breathing. Wachowski staggered toward Eli, heart hammering violently, her eyes wide with fear. "Are you hurt?" He smiled weakly, chest rising and falling painfully. "I'll survive." Their moment of relief was short-lived. Footsteps approached outside, purposeful and heavy. The cabin door kicked brutally open. A final man stepped inside, rifle steady, cruel smile beneath narrowed eyes, a face she recognized immediately from Massacre. "You ain't escaping me twice, savage," he growled coldly, aiming directly at Wachowski's heart. Eli moved without hesitation, shielding her body with his own, expression fierce yet calm, facing the barrel defiantly. "You don't have to do this, Carson," he said evenly, voice calm despite the gun aimed squarely at his chest. "They've done nothing wrong." The cowboy sneered, eyes hateful. "They ain't even people. Move, Sheriff. Don't die for her." Eli stood firm, jaw tight with resolve. "I reckon I found something worth dying for." Wachowski's breath stopped at his words, tears burning fiercely in her eyes. A gunshot thundered harshly through the cabin, echoing painfully loud. She flinched instinctively, expecting darkness, but felt no pain. Eli had surged forward, taking the bullet intended for her, collapsing heavily at her feet. "No!" Her cry ripped through her soul, heart breaking painfully. But grief ignited rage, pure and unstoppable. She lunged forward, blade plunging desperately into the attacker's chest. His eyes widened in shock before he crumpled lifelessly beside Eli. Wachowski knelt swiftly beside Eli, hands trembling violently. Blood pooled darkly beneath him, breath shallow yet determined. "Don't leave me," she pleaded desperately, tears staining her cheeks. "Not now." He smiled weakly, pain shadowing eyes full of quiet strength. "You're safe." "Camilla," she nodded quickly, voice trembling. "Alive, thanks to you." He reached weakly for her hand, gripping fiercely. "Good." He breathed softly, a tender smile lifting corners of his mouth. "Promised I wouldn't let harm come to you both." Tears fell freely now, emotions surging wildly within Wachowski's chest. She held him close, pressing fiercely against his wounded chest. "I can't lose you," she whispered, voice breaking. "I love you, Eli." Eli's eyes softened deeply, warmth blooming gently within their depths. "Then I reckon I'll fight harder," he whispered faintly, hand touching her cheek tenderly. For both of us. She held him tightly through endless minutes until, at last, dawn broke gently through shattered windows. Eli survived, breathing shallow yet steady, resilient, like her people, like her heart. As Camilla emerged trembling from hiding, relief washed deeply over them. Together, they stood among the remnants of violence, stronger, braver, forever changed by survival. And within Wachawee's heart, a promise quietly formed, binding her to Eli now beyond trust, beyond gratitude, perhaps towards something deeper, something beautiful built from ruin. Outside, the frontier stretched endlessly, dangerous and uncertain, yet no longer feared. Hope blossomed fiercely within them, bright enough to pierce darkness, guiding their hearts toward a future promising healing, redemption, and love. The wind carried the scent of smoke and earth, whispering tales of bloodshed, of settlers carving homes in a land that had never been theirs to claim, of warriors who had fought too long and lost too much. Taza sat before the fire, its flickering light casting jagged shadows over his face. The embers crackled softly, like whispers of ancestors long gone. He listened to the voices around him, men of his tribe, warriors hardened by betrayal and war, their bodies marked by scars that told stories of battles fought in the name of survival. Tonight, there was no laughter among them, no shared tales of hunts or victories. Tonight, there was only the weight of an order that would change the course of his life. Nantan, the chief, sat across from him, his eyes heavy with expectation. "The settlers have taken too much," he said, voice low, deliberate. "They cut into the land, push us into the hills like starving dogs. They build their homes where our ancestors walk." He reached into the folds of his robe and tossed something onto the dirt between them. It was a shard of pottery, cracked and dull, remnants of a people who had lived here long before the white man set foot upon this land. "They do not see what they destroy." Taza said nothing. He didn't need to. He knew the purpose of this meeting. The settlers had killed warriors in fear, slaughtered women and children in greed. There was no room for mercy anymore. "The cabin by the river," Nantan continued. "A woman and her young ones live there. They must be removed." Removed. The words settled like stone in his chest. "You will do this," the chief said, watching him closely. "You will prove you have not grown soft like the others." Taz's jaw tightened. He had never been soft. He had been raised in war, shaped by the knife and the bow, by the lessons of loss. He stood without a word, securing his weapons, the leather grip of his knife familiar beneath his fingers. The others watched him in silence, knowing what was to come. This was duty. This was justice. As he stepped into the night, the fire behind him dimmed, swallowed by darkness. The moon was high by the time he reached the homestead. It stood alone, a stubborn mark against the land, its wooden walls weathered but strong. The scent of livestock lingered in the air, mingling with the distant burn of pine from the chimney's mouth. Taza moved like a shadow, his moccasins silent against the dirt. His breath was slow, measured. He had done this before. A quick entry, a blade to the throat, and silence would reclaim what had been stolen. But as he approached, something stilled his hand. A sound, soft, fragile. Laughter. It was not the laughter of men, nor the arrogant mirth of soldiers drinking their spoils. It was lighter, filled with innocence. A child's laugh. He crept closer, his gaze finding the window. Through the slats of the wooden shutters, he saw them. A woman, her hair loose over her shoulders, sat by the fire. Her face was lined with something deeper than age, grief, perhaps, or exhaustion that came from fighting battles of her own. Beside her, two children curled beneath a quilt, their bodies small beneath the weight of the world. The younger of the two, no more than 6 or 7, reached for the woman's hand, whispering something. The woman nodded, brushing a strand of hair from the child's forehead. Taza's grip on the knife faltered. He had expected a soldier, a rifle-wielding man, someone ready to take from his people as so many had before. Not this. Not them. The past clawed at him, unbidden. He saw his mother, the night the Mexican soldiers came, their faces hard with cruelty. He had been a boy, hiding beneath the floorboards as she fought to protect him, her screams swallowed by the thunder of gunfire. His sister had been younger than the girl inside, her hands just as small. He had buried them both beneath the red earth, marking their graves with stones that time had long since carried away. A breath escaped him, rough and uneven. He could not do this, but the order stood. If he left them, another would come in his place, someone without hesitation, without ghosts that whispered warnings in the dead of night. A floorboard creaked. The woman stiffened, reaching for the rifle beside her chair. The firelight caught the steel, reflecting a cold promise. Taza stepped back, retreating into the shadows. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and the distant howl of coyotes. He did not run, but he did not linger. Before he turned away completely, he whispered the only warning he could offer. Asterisk, leave this place. Others will come. Asterisk. Then he was gone. Sarah Calloway gripped the rifle, heart hammering in her chest. She had not imagined it. There had been someone outside. She moved quickly, stepping over the sleeping forms of her daughters and unlatching the door. The night was still, save for the rustling of trees in the wind. Nothing. And yet, the feeling remained, a presence just beyond the reach of sight. Her hands trembled as she shut the door, bolting it firmly. She returned to the fire, staring into its depths, but its warmth did little to chase away the chill settling in her bones. She had come to this land with her husband, believing in the promise of a new start. That promise had died with him, leaving her to carve a life from the wild with nothing but sheer will. And now, it seemed, that life was at risk again. She glanced at her daughters, their faces peaceful in sleep. Tomorrow they would pack. They would leave before dawn. She did not know what had spared them tonight, but she knew better than to question fate. She also knew that mercy was a fleeting thing on the frontier. Taza did not return to camp. He could not. His absence would not go unnoticed, and the chief would demand answers. There would be none he could give. Instead, he followed the river, moving through the dark with the quiet certainty of a man who had made his choice and sealed his fate. By morning, he would be hunted. By sundown, he would be marked a traitor. And yet, for the first time in years, the weight on his chest felt lighter. He had walked into the night with blood on his hands. He would walk into the morning with something else. The first sign of danger came with the smell of smoke. Sarah Calloway jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs before her mind even caught up to the threat. The air inside the cabin was thick, heavy with the unmistakable scent of burning wood. Then she heard it, the unmistakable snap of a branch outside, the low murmur of voices just beyond the door. She threw off the blanket, her bare feet hitting the floorboards with barely a sound. Lillian stirred beside her, blinking groggily. Margaret lay curled on her side, oblivious. Sarah reached for the rifle. Another sound, a sharp crack like the splitting of timber, sent a chill up her spine. A moment later, the orange glow seeped through the cracks in the shutters. Fire. A new scent, grease, something unnatural. They were burning them out. She barely had time to move before the first shout rang through the night. The voices were not in English, but she understood them all the same. Panic threatened to choke her, but fear would not save them. Action would. She grabbed Lillian's arm, shaking her awake. Take your sister. Out the back now. Lillian's eyes widened, but she did not question. She reached for Margaret, pulling the smaller girl into her arms. The rifle was firm in Sarah's hands as she unlatched the back door, praying the darkness would cover their escape. The moment the door swung open, she saw him. Taza. For a split second, everything stopped. The same man she had seen in the shadows the night before, the one who had spared them. Now, standing at the edge of the tree-line, his face set in stone. Behind her, the flames roared higher. A warrior burst through the front door, his knife gleaming in the firelight. Sarah turned and fired. The gunshot shattered the night. The warrior staggered, but did not fall. He lunged. Then suddenly, an arm wrapped around his throat from behind, yanking him back. The knife never found its mark. Taza drove his blade deep, twisting, ending it in one swift motion. Sarah barely had time to process it before he turned to her, eyes fierce. Run. She didn't argue. She grabbed her daughters and ran into the trees. The night swallowed them whole. They ran until Sarah's lungs burned, until Margaret sobbed from exhaustion. The fire behind them had spread, licking hungrily at the cabin, sending thick plumes of smoke into the sky. Taza was ahead of them, his body moving with the certainty of a man who knew the land like his own heartbeat. He did not look back, but he slowed just enough to make sure they kept up. Sarah's legs trembled beneath her, but she pushed forward. Finally, when they reached a rocky ravine, Taza stopped. He turned to them, his breath steady despite the sprint. Sarah clutched Margaret against her chest. "Oh," she swallowed, still gasping. "Who were they?" Taza's expression did not change. "My people." Lillian let out a sharp breath, eyes darting between them. "Then why? Why did you help us?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I could not let them kill you." Sarah's fingers tightened around the rifle. His voice was calm, unreadable. "They will not stop. You must keep moving." Margaret whimpered, curling into Sarah's side. Lillian looked up at him, her small hands clenched. "Where do we go?" Taza turned, eyes scanning the dark forest. "West. The mountains will hide us." Sarah's head spun. She wanted to distrust him, to question him, to hate him. But the truth was undeniable. If not for him, she and her daughters would be dead. She swallowed. "You could have killed me last night." "I could have." He met her gaze. "But I did not." She exhaled, shaky but resolved. "Then lead the way." The wilderness was merciless. Sarah had traveled before, had braved the untamed land with her husband, had fought to carve out a life. But this was survival, not homesteading. Taza led them along the river's edge, where the current masked their tracks. Margaret clung to Lillian, her small feet stumbling over roots. Sarah lifted her when she could, ignoring the burning in her arms. The sky was a blanket of black velvet, the stars indifferent to their struggle. They walked until dawn, until Sarah's legs trembled with exhaustion. Taza finally stopped beneath a rocky overhang. "We rest here." Sarah collapsed against the stone, pulling her daughters close. Taza stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. She wanted to sleep. God, she wanted to sleep, but the questions gnawed at her. She looked at him. "They'll come after you too, won't they?" His gaze remained on the horizon. "Yes." She studied his profile. Strong, silent, unreadable. A man who had turned against his own to save them. "Why?" she whispered. This time he did not answer. But when he finally turned to her, his eyes were heavy with something she recognized all too well. Loss. Morning came too soon. Sarah awoke to find Taza already awake, crouched by the river, hands working quickly over a small fish he had caught. Margaret stirred beside her. "Mama." Sarah stroked her hair. "We're safe." Lillian sat up, rubbing her eyes. She glanced at Taza, then back at her mother. "Are we going to stay with him?" Sarah hesitated. The truth was they had no other choice. Taza handed her a piece of roasted fish. "Eat." She took it warily, offering the first bite to Margaret. The child hesitated, then took a small nibble. Her face scrunched, but she swallowed. Sarah took a breath and followed. It was not much, but it was food. Lillian edged closer to him. "You fight good." Taza glanced at her. "So do you." She flushed, then squared her shoulders. "I don't know how to fight." He studied her for a moment. "Not yet." Sarah watched as Lillian's expression shifted, something between curiosity and challenge. It was the first time she had seen her daughter look at someone without fear in a long time. Taza stood. "We move." Sarah rose, gathering what little they had. "Where?" "The mountains." He looked at her. "If we are lucky, they will not find us there." Her throat tightened. "And if they do?" His voice was steady. "Then we fight." By midday, the heat bore down on them. Sarah's dress stuck to her skin, sweat trickling down her spine. Margaret whimpered in discomfort, and Sarah lifted her, ignoring the ache in her arms. Taza walked ahead, his pace steady but never rushed. Lillian followed close behind. Sarah noticed how closely her daughter watched him, his stance, the way he scanned the terrain, how he moved through the land like it was an extension of himself. When he crouched suddenly, Raising a hand for them to stop, Lillian froze immediately. Sarah's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Taza didn't answer. He moved slowly, his body low to the ground, eyes locked on something in the brush. Then, asterisk, asterisk, a rattle. Asterisk, asterisk. Sarah's breath caught. Snake. Taza moved fast. With a single fluid motion, he drew his knife and struck. The rattlesnake's body jerked before going limp. Lillian exhaled loudly. That was close. Taza picked up the snake, inspecting it. It will feed us tonight. Margaret made a face. We have to eat that. Taza gave a rare, slight smile. Better than starving. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and something settled in her chest. He was no longer just a warrior. He was their only chance. And whether she liked it or not, she was beginning to trust him. The fire crackled softly, sending thin tendrils of smoke into the cool mountain air. Sarah sat near its edge, running a hand along Margaret's back as the child curled into her lap, her small body rising and falling with each deep breath. Lillian sat nearby, sharpening a stick with a stone, mimicking what she had seen Taza do earlier. The warrior sat across from them, silent as always, his gaze fixed on the surrounding darkness. He was always watching, listening, moving as though the land itself spoke to him. Sarah had spent years in the wilderness, had learned the unforgiving nature of it, but she had never seen anyone move through it as he did. He knew it in ways she never could. Lillian finally broke the silence. You knew they were coming, didn't you? Taza's gaze flicked to her. The firelight reflected in his dark eyes. Yes. Sarah shifted, watching him closely. Ow! He didn't answer right away. He reached for his knife, running his thumb along its worn handle, considering. I was meant to kill you. The words landed like a stone in Sarah's chest, heavy but not entirely unexpected. Lillian's hand tightened around the stick she had been carving. Margaret stirred slightly in her sleep, but Sarah kept her voice even. And why didn't you? Taza looked at her, his expression unreadable. Because I remembered. Sarah frowned. Remembered what? His gaze dropped to the blade in his hands. What is to lose everything? The fire popped, sending a brief shower of embers into the night air. Lillian swallowed. Did you lose your family? A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, he nodded. Sarah wasn't sure why, but something inside her softened. She had lost two. Lillian glanced at her mother, then back at Taza. Did you ever have kids? Taza didn't move for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. A son. The flames crackled between them, but no one spoke. Margaret murmured in her sleep, pressing closer against Sarah's chest. Lillian's voice was softer this time. What happened to him? Taza looked past them, into the trees, as if seeing something long gone. Soldiers. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night air. She exhaled, long and slow. You lost a child. Taza nodded once. Lillian hesitated, then reached for something in her pocket. She pulled out a small bundle of string and beads, something her father had made for her before he died. She studied it for a moment, then, with a quiet determination, extended it toward Taza. He looked at it, but did not take it. It's for protection, Lillian said. My father said it would keep me safe. Taza's fingers hovered over the simple trinket. Then, slowly he took it. Sarah watched the exchange, something tightening in her throat. Lillian had lost her father. And somehow, in this wild and broken place, she was reaching for something new, something unexpected. Taza held the small object in his hand for a long moment before tucking it carefully into the folds of his belt. Thank you. Lillian smiled slightly before returning to her carving. Sarah watched her daughter, then looked back at the warrior across from her. Perhaps trust was not something that was given all at once. Perhaps it was built in moments like these. The next morning, they moved again. Taza led the way, silent as always, his body moving with practiced ease through the dense forest. Sarah followed, keeping Margaret close. Lillian walked beside her, glancing now and then at their unlikely guide. The journey was relentless. The terrain grew steeper, the wind sharper. Sarah's feet ached, but she didn't complain. She had learned long ago that survival was not about comfort. They stopped at a small stream to rest. Taza crouched near the water, cupping a handful to his lips before motioning for them to drink. Sarah knelt beside Margaret, dipping a cloth into the cool water before pressing it against the child's flushed cheeks. Margaret mumbled sleepily. "Tired." Sarah smoothed back her daughter's damp hair. "I know, sweetheart. Just a little farther." Lillian sat beside her mother, watching as Taza pulled something from his belt. It was a small pouch filled with dried herbs and crushed bark. He handed it to Sarah. "Chew this. It will help with the pain in your legs." She hesitated before taking it, placing a small piece between her teeth. A bitter, earthy taste spread across her tongue, but almost instantly, the tension in her muscles began to ease. She looked at him. "What is it?" "Willow bark." He tore a piece for himself and chewed. Sarah studied him. This man, this warrior, had been their enemy. And yet, here he was keeping them alive. She exhaled and looked away. Margaret, still sleepy, turned toward Taza, her small hands clutching the edge of his shirt. For the first time, he did not pull away. Days passed in a strange rhythm. The mountains provided shelter, but the threat remained. Every night, Taza scouted ahead, making sure they were not being followed. Sarah watched him, noting how he always placed himself between them and the open trails, how he kept an ear to the wind. Lillian watched him too. She mimicked his movements, tried to walk as he did, studied how he listened to the forest. One afternoon, while Sarah prepared what little food they had, she looked up to find Taza handing Lillian a bough. Sarah froze, but she did not speak. Lillian's eyes widened as she took the weapon, fingers wrapping clumsily around the wood. Taza knelt beside her, adjusting her grip. "Hold here." Lillian bit her lip, concentrating. Taza stepped back. "Now pull." She struggled at first, the tension in the string almost too much for her. But she did not give up. Sarah watched as her daughter, so determined, so stubborn, learned. The first arrow barely moved. The second went a little farther. By the fifth, it landed against a fallen log. Lillian grinned. Taza nodded. "Better." Sarah swallowed against the unexpected warmth in her chest. Margaret clapped. "Lily's a warrior." Lillian beamed. Sarah met Taza's gaze. "You didn't have to do that." His expression was unreadable. "She will need to know." Sarah exhaled, looking at her daughter, at the way she stood a little taller now. Perhaps he was right. That night, as the fire burned low, Sarah sat beside Taza. The girls were already asleep, curled together beneath a blanket. She watched them for a moment, then turned to him. "You could leave," she said quietly. Taza didn't respond. "You don't owe us anything," she continued. "Yet you stayed." He finally looked at her. "You were given to me." Sarah frowned. "What?" "In my people's ways," he said. "When a man saves a life, he is responsible for it." She swallowed. "So we are your burden?" Taza shook his head. "No, you are my choice." Sarah's chest tightened. She looked at the man beside her, at the warrior who had once been sent to kill her and her children. Now, he was their protector, their teacher, their family. She exhaled softly. "Then we will fight together." Taza nodded once. Together. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah did not feel alone. The wind carried the scent of rain and blood. The sky, bruised with storm clouds, rumbled in the distance, a warning from the heavens themselves. Taza stood at the edge of the ravine, his gaze fixed on the trail below, where the dust had only just begun to settle. The Apache war party was coming. He had known this moment would arrive. The only question was whether they would survive it. Sarah crouched beside him, rifle in hand, her grip tight but steady. Lillian stood just behind her, an arrow notched in the small bow Taza had taught her to use. Margaret huddled in the small crevice between two boulders, her wide eyes reflecting the firelight. Taza scanned the trees. They moved in shadows, creeping, waiting, preparing to strike. His people, his brothers. And yet, tonight, they were his enemy. He turned to Sarah. No hesitation. She nodded, her face pale but resolved. "I won't let them take my daughters." Lillian swallowed hard but didn't look away. "I can fight." Taza looked at the girl, so young, yet with a fire in her that had not been there before. He nodded once. "Stay close." The first arrow sliced through the air, embedding itself into the dirt just inches from Sarah's boot. She flinched but didn't break. The second arrow never landed. Taza had already fired back, his shot striking true. A cry of pain echoed through the trees. The war had begun. The attack came fast, brutal. Figures emerged from the darkness, their war cries rising above the wind. Sarah fired, her first shot dropping the nearest warrior. Taza moved swiftly, knife in one hand, tomahawk in the other, cutting down the first man who dared get close. Lillian let her arrow fly. It missed, but it sent another warrior ducking for cover. They were outnumbered. Sarah knew it. Taza knew it, but they would not surrender. A warrior lunged for Sarah. She spun, the rifle swinging like a club, catching him across the jaw. He staggered, and she fired again, the shot tearing through his chest. Another came for Lillian. The girl's hands trembled as she tried to reload, but she wasn't fast enough. He grabbed her by the arm, yanking her back. Taza was there before she could scream. His knife found the warrior's throat, his tomahawk splitting through bone. Lillian stumbled backward, breathless. She stared at Taza with wide eyes. He wiped the blood from his blade. "You are not ready to die yet." The words sent a chill down her spine, but she nodded. "Neither are you." Margaret whimpered from her hiding place, her tiny fingers digging into the earth. Sarah risked a glance toward her youngest, and in that moment, she saw him. Chato. He stood atop the ridge, watching. He was larger than the others, broader, his face lined with years of battle. A leader among their people, a friend from Taza's past. Now, his executioner. The moment stretched, heavy with meaning. Then Chato raised his war club. Taza understood the challenge. Without a word, he stepped forward. Sarah's breath caught. "No." Taza glanced back. "Keep them safe." Then he was gone. The others stopped fighting. The battle was no longer theirs. This was between warriors. Taza and Chato circled each other. The past lingered between them. Memories of hunts, of laughter, of battles fought side by side. That bond was gone. Chato struck first, swinging the club in a vicious arc. Taza ducked, rolling away, his tomahawk slicing through the air. Chato blocked it, their weapons locking. "You were one of us," Chato spat. Taza pushed back, his breath steady. "I was." Chato swung again, and this time the blow connected. Taza staggered as pain exploded through his ribs. He tasted blood. He did not fall. Sarah gripped her rifle, watching with wide, frantic eyes. Lillian clenched her fists. Margaret cried out, "No." Taza moved, faster than Chato expected, faster than the others could track. His tomahawk met flesh, tearing across Chato's side. The warrior growled, more anger than pain, and drove his knee into Taza's stomach. Taza dropped to a knee. Chato loomed over him, raising the war club for the final blow. A gunshot shattered the night. Chato stumbled. Blood bloomed across his shoulder. Sarah stood behind them, rifle still raised, the smoke curling from its barrel. Chato turned to her, fury in his eyes. He stepped forward. Taza lunged, knife flashing. It was over in a single strike. Chato's body jerked. His mouth opened, but no words came. He slumped forward, blood pooling beneath him. Silence. The remaining warriors hesitated. Their leader was dead. Taza rose, covered in sweat and blood. He stared them down. One by one, they stepped back. Then, as silently as they had come, they vanished into the trees. The war was over. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Lillian dropped to her knees, exhausted, her hands shaking. Margaret ran to Taza, throwing her arms around his waist. He hesitated for only a moment before resting a blood-stained hand on her small back. Sarah met his gaze. "You saved us." Taza wiped his blade. "You saved yourselves." Lillian stood slowly, wiping dirt from her face. Are you going to leave now?" Taza did not answer immediately. He looked at Sarah, at Margaret, still clinging to him, at Lillian, who had grown in ways she did not yet understand. He exhaled. "No." Sarah's eyes softened. The wind had changed. The storm was passing. For the first time, they were not just survivors. They were family.